You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Sports science, strength and conditioning, high performance coaching. Welcome to the Decoding Excellence Show. Today's episode of the Decoding Excellence Show is brought to you by VOD Performance. VOD Performance is the makers of the Nordboard, the dashboard, and the groin bar. Whether it's return to play, performance testing, or rehabilitation, VOD Performance has the tools you need. So you might be asking yourself, who's actually using this performance technology? I don't know, say 14 different NFL teams, over 19 NCAA teams, 15 different English Premier teams, 5 NBA, 6 MLB teams, and many. They have the tools you need to get the very best out of your athletes. Check them out at vodperformance.com. Today on the show, we have Coach Tyler Friedrich. Tyler Friedrich is joining us from Stanford University, and he is a sports performance coach, and he is responsible for women's volleyball, beach volleyball, women's rowing, and men's water polo. Before coming to Stanford, Coach Friedrich was a sports performance coach at Arizona State University, where he has worked with football, women's volleyball, beach volleyball, men's and women's swimming and diving, triathlon, hockey, and wrestling. A number of sports, so a wide breadth of background to different athletic populations. Tyler's also worked as an assistant strength and conditioning coach at the University of Dayton, where he assisted with football, volleyball, track and field, women's basketball, and men's and women's soccer. Today on the show, we talk about a lot of different things, including some of the best advice that Coach Friedrich has received in his coaching journey, some of the successes, some of the failures, and some of the things that he does and how he utilizes technology to keep his athletes healthy and playing at the very best when it counts the most. This is a wide-ranging conversation, one that includes a lot of technical and tactical discussion about sport preparation. But it also includes many of the things that I like to discuss on each one of these Decoding Excellence episodes, which is the intangibles, the tools, the tactics, the mindset that goes into elite performance. And Coach Friedrich shares his thoughts and some of the things that he has navigated throughout his own coaching journey. This was a fun episode to record with Coach Friedrich. I took a lot away from this episode, and I know that you will too. This one will be a great one for you if you are interested in any of the sports performance technologies and Coach Friedrich's journey. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Coach Tyler Friedrich. Coach Friedrich, hey, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Excited to get this thing going here.
Yeah, man. I am likewise. I know we've caught up when you guys came out and visited us in Boulder, Colorado, and we've shared a conversation together and just kind of briefly touch base. But I'm glad to finally get you on the Decoding Excellence Show and provide the audience just an opportunity, a lens to get into seeing and understanding who you are as a coach, and for you to share your journey in your coaching profession about where you are and how you're doing. So before we get into some of the questions that we have in this interview, I'd love just to quickly have or provide an opportunity for you to share a little bit about what you're currently doing at Stanford and your current role and how that's evolved over the last couple of years, man.
Yeah, so right now I'm a sports performance coach at Stanford University. My teams are women's volleyball, beach volleyball, women's rowing, and men's water polo. And so those are my sports right now. Pretty highly involved. I would say my main priority is probably the volleyball team. It's one of our higher priority sports. Probably one of our over the decades, probably our best sport, I would say, in terms of producing national championships. So pretty highly involved with them. And we're doing, from a technology standpoint, we're doing a ton of stuff from we're using the Catapult GPS. We're doing a bunch of wellness tracking, fatigue management, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty highly involved. But currently, those are my those are my 4 sports right now at Stanford.
Excellent, man. Because and we're gonna get into talking a little bit about volleyball and just your role and the usual strength and conditioning touch points. Wellness questionnaires, monitoring, the workload monitoring that you're doing and utilizing with Catapult. But I'm gonna maybe kind of rewind the tape a little bit, because I think that's like right now in that we're discussing sort of the highlight reel, right? Like, and I know a lot of other strength conditioning coaches would look to you and look at what you guys are doing at Stanford and say, oh man, I wish I could do this, but without sort of full understanding of the journey that you've taken and sort of how you've had to earn your right into using some of this technology and through the various stops to other universities you've gone through. So let me rewind this and sort of maybe juxtapose the question to this. Like, how did you first get involved in strength and conditioning coaching, and maybe not only how, but why?
That's a great question. I've been involved in lifting weights since I was about 12 years old. I was playing Pop Warner football, and a kid that I played with, his dad was a physical therapist. And so me and 2 other buddies, we went in there and started lifting, kind of in the rehab area. They had, we'd bench press and squat, all that kind of stuff, and started to learn like some of the Olympic lifts. So from that standpoint, I've always been intrigued and always been involved in weightlifting and training for sport. I played sport. I've been into sport and playing sports my entire life. I played primarily football through high school and in college. And that's kind of how I got going with this. So I knew I wanted to be involved in athletics in one way or another. I wasn't sure if that was physical therapy or athletic training. I just knew I wanted to be involved with athletes. So I did my undergrad at the University of Dayton. And, I enrolled as exercise physiology major, just kind of leaving it open. We kind of had 2 paths. One was more of like a personal training type path, and one was more of like the higher science side. And my sophomore year over the summer, I did an internship in corporate wellness and absolutely hated it. It just was not for me. I think it's a great industry. I think those are great jobs, but for me, it wasn't what I wanted. So when I went back to school in the fall, I sat down in my strength coach's office, Mark Toby, and I said, hey man, I want to be you. I want to be a strength coach. I want to work in college athletics, and I want to do what you do. And he said, all right, come work for me. We'll see you at 6 a.m. tomorrow. And, the rest is history, so to speak. So was able to be really, really, really fortunate and work with him my last 2 years of undergrad. Internships along the way. I spent a summer at an Olympic training center in Lake Placid, which was awesome. Spent one summer down at LSU with Coach Moffitt, working with the football program down there. Was hired back at Dayton as a GA, was then hired full time. So again, extremely, extremely fortunate to Coach Toby and for giving us opportunities early on. That's kind of how I got started. And, as the paths have gone on, spent a couple years at Dayton, 3 or 4 years at Arizona State, and here I am, just rounding out my first year at Stanford, actually, just a couple days ago. So that's been the path up to this point.
Congratulations on the work anniversary, and what a kind of an interesting journey, right? Like, and it sort of mirrors some of my own in some respects, but to sit across from a potential mentor and sort of at this crossroads of life, like what path do I want to go down? Is it going to be exercise science and going to coaching, or the corporate wellness or the personal training route, and then sort of to sit across from somebody and be like, you know what, I want your job. I want to do what you're doing. Yeah. And then to have them take to risk essentially on you and say, all right, well, sure. Yeah. Show up at 6 a.m. in the morning. That reminds me so much of sort of my own sort of pathway at Michigan State. But I would have to imagine that at Dayton, and no disrespect to Dayton, just I think it's more of a representation of the industry, of how we're evolving and what we're using. I'm sure at that time it wasn't, heavily involved in using Catapult or workload monitoring or wellness questionnaires or the technology that you now currently have at Stanford.
No, we had none of that stuff. I mean, it was just he and I really for years. Like we'd have various interns kind of coming through our exercise science department, but I mean, it was just the 2 of us, and I think there were 17 teams on campus. And away we went. We worked every sport besides men's basketball and baseball. And we did everything. So every summer, I lived in Columbus, so I would drive down every summer and I would sand all of our platforms and then reseal them. So, make sure year to year we were okay. If a box broke, we're the ones that were fixing it or build new ones. All of our plate holders, same thing, was just 2x4s. So we did every little thing. If the racks were broken or if anything broke, we were the ones doing it. We did all the cleaning, everything. So really great experience to start there, just because it was tough and you learn a lot about how to make a lot out of very little. And we, in hindsight or looking back on it, like in comparison to the A10, like we were one of the top tier facilities, probably one of the top, higher level athletic programs just in terms of like success. So we were actually like, there were schools that were, didn't even have full-time strength coaches.
Wow.
And so we were in a pretty good position, but, looking back on it now, after being through and being in, some Pac-12 programs for 4 or 5 years, it was a grind. But you learn so much. And, Mark, he was hard on me. Like and I really appreciate that. I think just having played for him and him being my strength coach, I think that he just, I know he felt very comfortable in being tough on me and holding me to a higher standard, which, long term has benefited me so much. So I am forever grateful to him and kind of what we built together. I think now they built a brand new weight room, so now they're living the good life over there. Like things are looking up for them since in the last couple of years.
And I think that's common, right? Like, and even in my own journey and some of our interns' journeys, I try to share that same story. In that, so often it's young professionals starting to get into the field that wants to immediately utilize the latest bells and whistles, and there's some wisdom in actually having to get your hands dirty and to go through and build it yourself and not have the tools. You become a better craftsman when you don't have to rely on technology. You get to build your own sort of tool set by yourself before having to have it right out of the box ready to go.
Exactly. It's helped me so much with just simple problem solving. I think if you're at a university that has everything, when you're an intern, that's what you learn. You kind of forget what it's like, or you don't learn what it's like to have to figure everything out. Like we didn't have a nutritionist, we did the nutrition. So you learn things that you would never learn along the way, depending on your resources. And I'm not comparing one school to the other or saying that having resources makes you less of a strength coach. I'm just saying, some of the things that you're exposed to in that situation can really benefit you as your career moves on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's similar to like Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. When you don't have a nutritionist, you have the opportunity to learn that. And when you don't have some of the workload monitoring technologies or sport performance technologies, you have to learn the craftsmanship of how to do it. And I think when you get your hands in the engine and you're building it yourself, it makes you appreciate the tools, the technology, and the resources you have when you actually do have them. But kind of to continue to keep this thing moving a little bit, you've already talked a little bit about Coach Toby and some of the mentors that you've had in your own journey, but I want to continue to rewind this thing and maybe go a little bit further into your history, but along sort of maybe like your home life. Did you ever have any sort of like your parents or family friends or anybody that was really influential into maybe setting you down this sort of educator, this coaching role? Was there anybody in that sort of early life that helped inspire you or motivate you or acted as an influence for you?
My parents have always been extremely, extremely supportive of everything I've done throughout my entire life. So I have not a single complaint, in terms of my home life. I would say my mom's a teacher, so that's probably where, this internal drive to teach and educate athletes or just individuals comes from. So I think that's just kind of in my bloodline. But, like in terms of the home life, I was really fortunate growing up to have great coaches, and along the way, like whether it be Pop Warner football or in high school, like I had a strength coach in high school. He was also our linebackers coach. He was a walk-on at Ohio State, and so he did all of our strength and conditioning. And he was tough on us. And at the time, I hated him, to be honest with you. But, it's little things like that where you kind of look back on it and laugh now. It's like if I just had known what I know now, I think I would have appreciated those moments, so much more. my entire family, to kind of rewind again, like my entire family, we've always been highly involved in sports. So I think just always being in that type of environment, it just fosters leadership, it fosters competitiveness. And that's something that as you grow up and you enter the real world, that those are good qualities to have: loyalty, leadership, commitment. Those are all things that playing a sport, your entire life essentially really helps you develop as a person, and ultimately now as a strength and conditioning professional.
Yeah, no doubt. And there's a couple of things in that mirrors mine as well. As we go through this, I think I'm finding more commonalities, and the more interviews I do with other strength coaches, I think there's more similarities than differences between us all. But my mother as well was a fifth grade educator for over 30 years. And it's like, I think even for me, it's like that rich sort of education background sort of mirrored and sort of seeped into my own life of, I very early on in sport as well, as I was, a wrestler. I never thought about really wanting to become an educator, but the more I got involved in sport and the more that I saw the vehicle of education and how it impacts people's lives, it was also very similar to your own journey in that regard. But, I think somebody from the outside looking in and get to see sort of you on the stage that you're at with a proverbial powerhouse volleyball team like you have and the resources that you have at Stanford, they could very easily sort of assume that that's the highlight reel, right? Like you must have it great. There's never anything bad. You've never had any failure. And so often, the more that I talk with other coaches, it's almost like we've gotten to where we've gotten through failure, through adversity, through those hardships. And I was just curious from one coach to another, has there ever been a failure, or do you have any, stories or anything like your favorite failures or apparent failures that in the moment you're like, man, like here I am, this is the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to me. But later in hindsight, when it's 50-50, or 20/20 hindsight, that later sets you up for success. Are there any things like that in your own journey that maybe seemed like a failure, but set you up for success later?
Yeah, I think as you progress and as you get more and more experience, like these things just pop up. I don't think I've one like favorite failure or one that really stands in my mind, but I know that as years have gone on, like when I first got into this, I was kind of a hothead, and so I had a hard time adapting or adjusting to a coach changing a schedule, and so you sometimes you say things or you make a decision that is a little rash, and it's not exactly like the best in terms of like most professional relationship, and understanding that when you work with a sport coach or athletic trainer, whoever it is, that maybe some give and take. So those are the failures along the way that aren't necessarily like earth shattering. They aren't necessarily like going to make or break your career, or I guess that could make or break your career. It depends on what the mistake is, but those are things that as you go along, like you just learn from those. And I look back and it's like, man, like if I had just been a little bit more level-headed and just taken that in stride a little better, like I think that experience would have been a whole lot more smooth. And, my first year at Arizona State, so one of my athletic trainers and I, we just did not get along. It just was, and honestly, like for no real reason, I think we were both just a little stubborn and a little just kind of, sticking to our guns. And instead of just sitting down and having like a civil conversation to give and take a little bit, and meet in the middle, instead, we just were too stubborn about it. And so, it was a kind of a tumultuous relationship for my first 6 months there, and that just wasn't necessary. And then, we rectified the situation, and the back half of she was a GA, so the back half of her GA-ship, I thought we were great. And it's just like, why do we wait 6 months to be like this? And our relationship now is great. The service we're giving our athletes is so much better. Like, why do we take this long to get to this point? So I think it's little things like that you just that pop up, little failures along the way, whether it be things you say or things you do or don't do. I think that, there's quite a few of those, throughout my career.
I have similar stories. I think that, when you're sitting and you're talking with one coach or another, that it's, these little bushfires, if you will, right? That don't necessarily have to be the worst case scenarios or the biggest sort of events, but it's it's so much better when you can just sort of have a civil conversation and put these fires out initially and move on and to have a great growing relationship after that fact. But, I want to return back to this sort of mentorship aspect of it, because that's the listening audience of the Decoding Excellence Show loves the details of these things. And I think they're mostly type A personalities, maybe like myself. But, was there anything that, your coaches that you've worked for or worked under, was there any particular way that you would say they helped shape your path to who you are as a coach today? Lessons or experiences or stories that really resonate with you that really made you the coach that you are today?
I would say that the most common thread or the biggest commonality between every place that I've been and every mentor, boss I have had has been they've thrown me to the fire. And which at the time it sucks. I'm type A as well, so I like a plan. I like structure. I like knowing exactly what's going to happen. And as we all know in strength and conditioning, we plan our asses off, but it never turns out that way, or very rarely does it follow like the script that we want. And so whether it be, down at LSU or at the Olympic Training Center or at Dayton, whatever the case may be, it's been, kind of thrown into the fire, and you got to learn on the fly. And again, I think at the time it's brutal and it's frustrating and it can kind of put some doubt in your mind. But as the experience goes on and as the more and more experience you get, you learn and you adapt and you grow. Then all of a sudden, you're killing it. You're rolling. You're feeling really confident. You have a really good grasp on everything. And that to me has been, everywhere I've been, it's kind of been that way. And, even down at LSU with Coach Moffitt, this was back before the 5 coach rule. This was a while back. The interns, basically they would assign interns 5 or 6 or 7, they were typically walk-ons, but hey, these are your guys. So you're down on those racks on the end, and it's your job to get these guys right. So yes, while they're probably non-contributors in the grand scheme of things, that's, for your first day on the job down at, working with Coach Moffitt. And if anyone knows Coach Moffitt, he's a pretty intense dude. It's a pretty intense program. Here we go. We're rolling. So, it's just situations like that. Same thing at Dayton. It's just hey, I'm a junior undergrad, and it's hey, you're going to write the program and run the strength program for the women's rowing team. Here we go. Okay. I really didn't know what to do. So, you just learn along the way. And so that's one thing I'm ultra appreciative of all of my mentors along the way for putting me through situations like that, because it just makes you so much better. And that's one thing, if I could share some wisdom with a younger strength coach or, interns or whatever the case may be, it's don't be afraid, don't be nervous in those situations. They're going to happen, but that's okay. You just got to stay calm, stay composed, fight through it. And when you get out on the back end of it, when you get spit out, you're going to be a way better coach and be way more prepared for anything that's upcoming. And any job interview you can go into, you can throw that out there and say, hey, here's something that I struggle with. Here's how I overcame it. And now I'm on the backside of this thing. I'm dominating. So that's something that I'm truly grateful, across the board.
And that sort of reminds me a lot of, the same sort of environment that Ken Manny had at Michigan State and Red Wakeham on the Olympic side, is just that the intensity, but also the aspect of really taking ownership of what your role was and what your job was. And, I remember the first couple months on the job as a lowly intern, it's you are wiping down machines and you're putting weights away. And it's you better have extreme sort of ownership of doing that, because you are essentially putting your namesake on whatever various task it was.
Absolutely.
And it was jumping in, and whether it's the most mundane or mediocre task of what it could possibly be, it was this is a representation of you and your character and who you are and the level of attention to detail that you have. And that, you essentially earned your stripes as you continue to do it. So for me, it was I'm going to make sure that this floor is the cleanest floor possible. And these
100%.
Machines are the cleanest. And then over time, it's as you go through that and you become a graduate assistant, same way, the representation and the attention to detail in the programming and the way that you coach, it's just, it materializes to every aspect of what you're doing in coaching. So you talked about that piece of advice, and I thank you so much for sharing it. And I want to continue to go down this sort of advice giving road for a moment, because I think that you are a guy that has a lot of real world advice, and, various stops along your way from Dayton to Arizona State. You're working your way through the Pac-12 here, and now at Stanford. We have, and you're probably very similar in that, we have these great high quality interns that are facilitating and helping with programs, and they're learning so much right now. And I know we have 3 interns here at this facility, our basketball only facility, really basketball volleyball facility here at Coors Event Center, and tremendous interns that are smart and capable. And what I fear sometimes, and this is sort of that one coach to another and the mentorship that we provide, is that sometimes I fear that, their noses are deep in the NSCA textbook. They're going through their CSCCA practicum and getting that experience and learning anatomy and physiology and exercise science, that maybe they're not having necessarily the real world experience, the real world advice they need to be successful when they actually do get that first full-time position or that graduate assistant position. So you've already talked about the flexibility and the adaptability a little bit, but is there any sort of advice that you would give to a young, passionate, wannabe strength and conditioning intern that's just ready to take that leap into that first full GA role or into that first full-time entry position? Is there any sort of advice that you would give them to make that jump from one level to the next?
Yeah. So when I ran the intern program at ASU, we would tell our interns kind of the same thing is don't be afraid to hop in there and be involved and coach. But that being said, tread lightly, don't overstep your bounds. So I know it's easy to say, and it's kind of it's a gray area, and it's kind of ambiguous in terms of like, well, what is overstepping, what is not. But we just kind of said, like, listen, learn, and then start like coaching where you can. So, great opportunities, or if there's someone on an injured card, that's a great person to go latch yourself onto. And you look at, like, right now, Arizona State, their current GA, Tyler Shoemate, he was an intern for us, and he just latched on with injured guys. So there are 3 or 4 injured guys that summer we had him, and he just coached the heck out of them. And he earned himself that position because he managed those guys with everything he had. And that's a great way to start, kind of get your feet wet coaching, because it's not really, if you are wrong about something, it's kind of low risk. But you also, we as full-time staff can now trust you. We start putting trust in you because you can handle this small group of guys. So then you come work over with our team. If you're working with volleyball, I know, hey, you're going to watch these 2 racks. So you kind of slowly build that trust as you go. The second piece of advice I would say is stay professional. As an intern, typically you are not much older, or you are like the same age as a lot of those junior, seniors, 5th-year athletes. So it can be really easy to kind of cross that line because you guys are all kind of the same age. So, I don't know if tread lightly is the right word, but just be professional and understand, like, okay, I am in this position. Like, I don't need to act, or I don't need to be 21, 22 years old around these kids. When I'm on my own time, sure. But, when I'm on the floor working with these athletes, I need to be professional. I need to separate myself from that kind of like younger mindset and treat myself as a full-time coach, even though I am an intern. And again, I think that just really builds the good rapport with the athletes. It builds good trust with the full-time staff. And then, when you start applying for GA ships, I'm sitting here backing you 100%. Like, this guy or this girl is the real deal. Like, they need, they are a must hire.
Yeah. That makes me think of, I know for me, during my first full-time role, having just graduated from the master's program at Michigan State and being really only about 2 years older than our 5th-year seniors, that, I came into that role, and I think I was 29 years old for 7 years, yeah, exactly. I didn't want them to be like, I'm only 2 years older than you. And yeah, but I'm an authority figure, and I want you to learn, and I want you to kind of take the advice that we're saying. So I think that's incredible advice, as remaining professional.
I think that's something that I kind of learned the hard way, because I had 2 teams at Dayton when I was in my fourth year.
Wow.
So I'm literally coaching kids that were in the same grade as me.
Yeah.
So, like they're senior on the women's rowing team or senior on the men's tennis team. Like I'm coaching you, but I'm also in your class. We're graduating together. So that's, it was hard to kind of create that separation. So that's something it was a skill, to be honest with you. Like, it's really hard when you're 20, 21 years old. It's really hard to have that skill and have that mindset.
Yeah.
But as each year went on, I was able to further and further understand, like, okay, this is more and more important. I really need to create that separation. And so it's a skill that you acquire. But I think if you have the right mindset going in to your internship, like you said, like, you're 29 years old for 7 years in a row, like, you got to do, if that's what you got to do, it's what you got to do. And, to kind of go off on a tangent here, like, we have a lot of part-time staff here at Stanford. I think we have 5 or 6 of them, and all of them have done an unbelievable job at creating that separation. Like, one of our coaches, Molly Pfeiffer, who works with me, like, she's 21 years old. She was intern for us in her last winter and spring as a senior in college, and she's here working with some of our fifth-year volleyball girls who are literally older than she is, and you would never know. She's done an incredible job, and hopefully she does not get hired from this, because I really need her to operate. So, so just to kind of go off on a tangent, like, they all came in, that intern class came in, and, with their mind right, and, it's paying off for them, because they went from being interns to now all being part-time. And so hopefully in the next year or so, like, either are working here or we get them full-time jobs, down the line, and they're going to kill it. So, having that mindset, having that ability to separate yourself it sets you up for an enormous amount of success.
Through this show and through other podcasts and other shows, that there's a lot of similar threads between coaches, right? And there's a lot of similarities and commonalities between coaches that operate at very high level. Program design, the way they think, the things, the resources they look to, but also there's some differences, and we all have different opinions, and is what essentially makes it fun, and it makes us human. And I'd love to sort of explore some of the opinions that you might have. And this is a common question I love to ask the guests that come on this show, but is there any sort of bad recommendations that you hear in sort of strength conditioning or in education or in exercise science or whatever that seems to get echoed through the industry, or things that you say, you know what, maybe I don't actually really agree with that, but you hear it kind of commonly thrown around in strength conditioning?
I don't know if I hear like a commonly bad recommendation per se. I think some of the mistakes I've seen is whether it be any coach, really, young, old, or indifferent, not being willing to make change or to learn more, or not willing to be adaptable. Yeah. I think the industry, as we all know, is constantly evolving, and especially now with the emergence of technology just kind of ballooning and taking over, I think there's a lot of pushback from the older generation of strength coach, which I don't know if that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that, is it the worst thing in the world? So I think when I hear anyone act 100% resistance to something new, or 100% resistance, to learning, or just even having some insight, I think that's the wrong way to go about it. And so, you don't have to agree with everything, but I think if we're using HRV, for example, to track, fatigue, whether you think that's worth it or not, you should at least look into it. You should at least see what kind of results you get. And if it turns out that you don't really like the way HRV, the data gives you, then you move on. And that's just HRV, just a random example. So that's just kind of, so again, I don't know if it's like one singular or two, like, hey, these are like the worst things you could possibly do, or the worst things anyone's told you. I just think being resistant to change, or just unwilling to even like look into anything, I think is a mistake.
What I really like about that too is that, and something that you and I share, is that adaptability. And there's a phenomenal quote that I often share with our interns, and it's a Bruce Lee quote. And I'm no disrespect to Kung Fu or anything like that, but adapt what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. So I share that all the time with our internship staff here, is that look, you're going to see things that you might not necessarily agree with, and that is okay. That's fine, right? Take something from it, adapt what you really, really like, what you think is useful, and maybe disregard what is useless for your situation, for your environment, for your context, but at least show the willingness to understand something and try to explore something.
100%. Like nothing should be out of the question. But we all have our, what we like, and there's things that, we've seen along the way and, our own philosophies. And, I think everything should get a chance to see kind of where it fits. And if it doesn't work, if it's not going to work, then you just move on from it. I don't think that doesn't make that idea or that concept wrong. It doesn't make it stupid. It just doesn't mean that it doesn't fit with your program, but it might work great with somebody else. So yeah. I think it's not black or white. I think everyone's got to be able to, at least show the ability to be adaptable if they wanted.
To bridge that question, I'd love to ask maybe a two-part question here, and that is, within the last, say, 3 years, is there anything like that, whether it's a new belief, a behavior, a tool, a resource that you're using that has improved sort of the services that you provide for your student athletes? And that's sort of the first part of it. But then same question, right? Anything, beliefs, philosophies, behaviors, tools, resources that improved your life outside of coaching, right? So the coach that you are, the person that you are, when you're not on the floor, when you're not coaching, is there anything that in the last 3 to 5 years that's improved your life? And then whether it's performance technologies or things you're doing differently for your student athletes to improve their sport performance, their durability, or their resolve.
Yeah, so I think within the weight room and within, my program, and I think as I've researched and implemented more and more fatigue management or workload management. I'm going to use systems for lack of a better word. I think that's really helped me with my programming, just understand what it is I'm doing, what kind of effect that has on the athletes internally or physiologically, and also looking at like how our practice loads will affect the athletes. I think it's a way for me to kind of like bridge the gap between practice and training and make sure that one, we're trained appropriately to manage the workloads of our practice and manage the workloads of our competitions, and understand we can make sure our athletes can handle those. But I also think it just gives me good insight to how each kid reacts to a certain type of training. Everyone is so different. And so if you're using a simple RPE scale and just doing a session RPE to get an internal load, I might have one athlete who is just mentally just a stud, and she might rate every workout, every conditioning session a 3 or 4 because she just can mentally overcome, tough situations where someone else may not. So and every workout is going to be a 7 or an 8 or whatever the case may be. So it's good to know how each athlete differs, so you can establish your relationship with each athlete is going to be a little different. So I think that's really, really important, and that's helped me more from the programming standpoint, but more from a relationship standpoint, being able to personally connect with the athlete and have those conversations about, again, if we want to talk just about being physical, if we want to talk about how to be better leaders, if we want to talk about how to mentally overcome like hurdles in the conditioning, so that's really helped me from a sports performance standpoint. Just kind of that emergence of sport technology, or just kind of using those recovery, management models, or however you want to call them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, outside the weight room, I think as the years have gone on, and as each year goes on, I've been able to just further and further be more comfortable in my role and responsibilities, and so I think that has helped me outside to relax a little bit. I think I was a little high strung as the early years were on. I think it's just a lot of stress, and it's long days, and you string them all together, and especially like when I was working football at Arizona State, like it's high pressure, man. Like every game you lose, you just feel that pressure. Like, man, like are we gonna get fired, or are we gonna be good? So I think as the years have gone on, I've been able to better and better handle all of that, and I give all that credit to my wife. She has been absolutely amazing. She's been a huge catalyst for me and helping me or allowing me to like do this job and work the hours. I mean, she was an athlete herself. She played volleyball at Dayton, and so she understands the demands of what it takes to prepare for a season and prepare, to be successful. And so she has been unbelievably great in terms of understanding, how this job is. And she's fully immersed herself in the culture of all the teams I've worked with at all the schools I've worked with. And she loves the family atmosphere. So she makes it a point to be involved. And I think that's absolutely great. And that's what's kind of allowed me to do the job that I'm most passionate about.
I'm so glad that you touched upon it, because I know that, in other shows that I think not a lot of people have talked much about that, but the demands and the sacrifices that a spouse goes through when they, in some respects, didn't sign up for the aspect of being married to a coach, the challenges, the demands, the stressors, the scheduling of what our profession sort of requires, and not to put us at any, on a pedestal by any means, because there's so many different other professions that make even greater sacrifices, both time and livelihood and security. But, I really wanted to take a moment and say, like, for my own wife, yeah, absolutely. It's a tremendous sacrifice that they make, but for any coach's wife or husband or whoever, it's a huge sacrifice. But I'd love to, because I know I was going to ask you this down the road a little bit, when you do feel sort of overwhelmed or unfocused or stressed, or you whatever it might be, like, is there any particular habits or routines or things that you do to sort of outside of the gym to restorative, essentially, to regain that focus, to regain that passion, to regain that sort of attention, to manage your own stressor as a release, to maybe provide you an opportunity to go back on the floor and to redouble down your efforts in your coaching? Is there anything that you particularly do?
I wouldn't say there's like a recurring habit. I would say that in stressful, so like, on that off day and the most stressful weeks of the most stressful of months, really making sure that, my wife and I, Rachel, we step away, on that off day, and we do something for us. And I think that's been, it's that moment, or it's that, stepping away that really reignites, because you have that day where it's just like, I'm thinking of nothing about work, as hard as it may be, especially like in an in-season when you're really, a Monday off day, you're still at work, obviously. As hard as it may be, we work hard to take those opportunities to step away. And especially like, again, in an off season, if it truly is an off season and you have a Friday, Saturday off, which I know are rare, but we take advantage. And she has done a great job in making sure, like, hey, like, let's do this. Let's go somewhere. Let's, take a little, or do a staycation or something along those lines. Let's take time for us to go and just be together. And that always reignites the flame to come back, because you just get some R&R. Even if it's for 24 hours, and you come back to work just feeling a little more rejuvenated about life outside of the weight room. And I think that helps when you come back in, because, the passion is there. And so that's typically like kind of how we handle those situations and that stress.
Just to explore that road a little bit, not just stress management, but I wanted to kind of tie back into sort of the technology. And this show is by all means sort of an all-encompassing choose your own adventure sort of road show. So it does happen to jump around all over, which is sort of sure. the essence of the show. But to go back to some of the workload management and the tools, the technologies that you've used, and I know I asked you that about, in the last couple of years, what have you sort of adapted to help improve the services that you provide for your student athletes? And I think that's a great touch point. And as a sort of a technologist myself and a kid that grew up in the computer and internet era, performance technology is something that I'm fascinated by. And I'd love to sort of explore maybe some of the tools that you guys are using. You've already mentioned, like session RPE and workload management, and the catapult units. My sort of selfish question is it, like S5 units? Are you guys using the smaller sort of indoor devices. And then to expand on that, what other sort of technologies does a Stanford that is heavily resourced and financially capable, what other technologies are you guys using to bring out the very best in your athletes?
So with the catapult, we're using S5s. Obviously, we can't get any of the GPS metrics because we're inside. So we primarily, from a GPS standpoint, just look at primarily right now is player load. We're taking it small. I'm looking on my own at some different metrics as well, but we're just looking at player load and using that to create our own acute to chronic workload ratios for our external load. And then we're using the session RPE, so we just take RPE times duration for the internal load. And so those are our main two metrics that we're looking at right now from a workload management standpoint. In terms of like a wellness tracking, we do 3 surveys a day. We do a morning wellness, which they'll do HRV. We use HRV for training is the app. And so we're fortunate enough to have teamwork. So like I just send out the link to our survey through like a teamwork text message. They do a pre-practice survey. So let me go back. Our morning wellness survey, we do HRV. We ask like, how's your social stress on a scale of 1 to 10? How's your academic stress? How's like your student athlete stress? We look at, we ask, how many hours did you sleep? How was the quality of that sleep? And then what kind of day do you have upcoming? Is it a difficult day? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most difficult. Our pre-practice surveys kind of revisit those things. So we ask, like, did you properly fuel for today's practice? How's your day been going? So we look at the difference between, so if they said, hey, today's a 10 for me, it's the most difficult day ever. And then they come into practice and we ask how the day is going and it's a 2. We say, hey, you're having a pretty good day. Like why was it so great? Oh yeah, it's a really hard test. I went in there, I nailed it. And then my 12 o'clock class got canceled and I had a really great lunch. So today's going great. But then we also see the flip side of that. We see, hey, like today, my typical day's a 3. They come into practice and their day's a 9. And how's it going? Today's a 9, which is bad. So hey, what happened? Oh, I totally forgot to do this homework assignment or, whatever the case may be. So it's good insight, before we're going to a practice, how our athletes are mentally, like how they're kind of coming in, like mentally, emotionally, physically. Lastly, we do a post-practice survey, which again, we ask them to give us the RPE. And then we also ask some simple questions, kind of like, hey, rate yourself, scale of 1 to 10. How'd you feel at practice today? Or how'd you feel like you performed? Did you feel sharp and quick? How mentally sharp were you? How mentally engaged were you? Things like that. So we kind of get their own, like, kind of some self-ratings. So we can kind of go back afterwards and just kind of see like how they felt about their own performance. So it's a pretty comprehensive. We do it with just volleyball and beach volleyball. So it's pretty comprehensive in terms of everything we're collecting. But it's great insight for us because we're literally sitting here and looking at week by week and saying, okay, like we want our external workload to be, about a 1 for this week. We want to maintain a 1.0. Until we get to about the NCAA tournament, then maybe take it down to a 0.9, 0.85, something in that range. So a lot of teams in the country are just cutting the legs out this time of year with it kind of getting close to postseason, and we're pushing. So we're trying to maintain this workload that we built up, which is awesome. I think there's a stigma behind using GPS or tracking workload of hey, like we have to reel everything in, like. We're doing just the opposite. We're trying to make sure we push to that very outer limit as far as we can go before we push too far. And because of that, we're seeing some really great data. We're kind of getting in front of some illnesses. We're seeing that if we increase training load between 12 to 14% week to week, we have some kids starting to get little head colds. We're 4 for 4 on predicting it, and it's happened. And so we're kind of starting to like see these trends. And I'm not saying we're going to prevent illness or prevent injury, but we're seeing these trends now that as the years upcoming, we can actually make some pretty informed decisions based on our data. And again, everyone's an N of 1, so everything is very individualized. So we take everything with a grain of salt. Like if we have some kids, kind of in the red from a workload standpoint, and we can't just like react. We sit down, we look at the calendar. Coach and I look at the calendar and say, okay. Well, she's in the red today, but tomorrow is a travel day, so we're not practicing. And then so it's like basically an off day. And then Friday is just a serve pass practice, so we're actually going to be able to rebound a little bit for our Friday evening match and be just fine. So again, we take everything. It's easy to react when you see red squares pop up in your morning wellness or your post practice survey or whatever, but we take everything with a grain of salt and try to take that global picture and how we react to each athlete on an individual basis.
No, I think what really helps out for you is that you have the understanding of not only the sport technology and what the metrics are and what you're looking at, but you also have a rich understanding of what the context in which the athlete is going to be exposed to. And sometimes I think when I've had conversations with other sports scientists that are slightly removed from the sport, that they lack some of the understanding of the context. So, they will see those red squares. They will see, player load that's exceeding their acute chronic and, immediately go to try to pull back on that without understanding that the next day is just serve and pass, or it's a travel day or whatever. And that we can use those moments of opportunities to allow them to recover and rejuvenate and to get where they need to be. And you touched upon it, and I thought it's just bears worth repeating, is that I think the commonality with GPS and using some of these player load metrics is that, people from the outside looking in think that sports scientists and people that use technology want to restrict the sort of opportunities for a sport coach to practice, to train, to do whatever. And I think that couldn't be further away from the truth. We want to uncover when those moments of opportunity are to push farther, to push harder, to go greater. But when the window's closed for particular athletes because of social stressors or academic stress or physical external loads, then maybe that's a time where we, like you said very early on in this show, we adapt, we make a change, we do something different, we alter a training schedule to allow them what they physically need at that moment. And I think that's not being a player's coach. That's not being a pushover. That's being smart. That's using the qualitative data, the quantitative data that you have in a qualitative way to make the best decision you can for a student athlete to put them in the best possible place to be successful.
Exactly. And we're prioritizing their health overall. So, and by prioritizing their health, if they're healthier and performing better and winning more, they're going to have just a better overall experience. So it's not just about the wins and the losses, it's about the overall experience for the athlete and maximizing everything we can out of them. And again, it's on an individual basis. So if you're someone who never plays, doesn't mean we can't maximize how we're training you. And doesn't mean we can't maximize your workload. So exactly right. Like it's so much more than just wins and losses. Like the personal relationships, if I can reach out to a kid and say, hey, like, you slept 3 hours last night, is everything okay? Oh yeah, I'm just up late studying for exam. Like, while it seems so minor and it may seem insignificant, like that little reaching out just to make sure a kid is okay goes a long way with your relationship with a kid. They know that I care about them more than just what they're doing on the platform or on the court. I care about how they are as people outside of the building. And that to me, I think just and at the end of the day, just goes so much further in terms of like their overall experience and development as humans.
Yeah, I think we as a profession, and there's people that do this incredibly well, and this is, my, I guess, podium to say this to the audience that might be potentially listening to this, is that, so much of what we need to do is continue to close that feedback loop. And that if there are athlete readiness questionnaires or wellness questionnaires or metrics that we're collecting, that we circle back and we have those conversations. And that's, that is so important, like to reach out and to have those touch points in an athlete's lives and say, hey, I recognize that you're a little bit down, or that you reported that your social stress is a little bit higher. Like, is there anything I can do to help? What's going on in your life? And to have that sort of intimate one-on-one conversation of understanding all the various stressors an athlete has, I think really goes a long way into showing that we care, because there's not a coach across the country, I don't think, that doesn't care for the athlete. It's just that there's a miscommunication in the behaviors that we might potentially have by not having that conversation or not building that rapport, that relationship with an athlete. And that's something I see so often. So credit to you to physically have and return to those touch points and those conversations with student athletes. So I want to be respectful of your time. I know, off days and come few and far between, especially in the second half of conference as we're starting to get further and further into this thing. So I just wanted to follow up and again, and maybe a last question or so, and then and wrap this up for you so that you can get back to your wife and to have a little bit of a Sunday for you. But, again, I said that it's very easy to look at somebody like you in a position that you're at and think that, you have all the resources, you have the financial aspects of Stanford being as well-funded as they are, but being successful, being in this position where it's a high profile, Stanford volleyball is known as a proverbial powerhouse within volleyball. Is there anything that when being successful, are there any potential downsides of all of this that maybe somebody, an intern, a volunteer, or a graduate assistant looking at a position like you have, is there any potential downsides of having this success?
Yeah, I think there comes, obviously when it comes to having continued success, there's always that pressure to perform and pressure to have this like extreme output of like we're the best all the time. And I think when that happens, it's easy to try to reinvent yourself year to year, quarter to quarter, semester to semester, or whatever it is. Like I got to be on the latest and greatest because I went to Stanford volleyball and we just won the national championship and we're trying to repeat. So I got to find the latest and greatest and change the way I do everything. And that's not necessarily always the answer. When I was a football player at Dayton, I was voted team captain, and my head coach sat me down and he gave me the best advice I think I've ever been given. He said, you were voted team captain because of who you are, not because of who people think they want you to be. So be yourself. Don't try to be something like now because you're team captain, something different than you. And that to me has just resonated so much because that is an amazing piece of advice. And, because our strength coaches, while we have to be adaptable and we have to be, on the front edge and try to ever be adapting to, produce the best program and give our athletes the best service, at the same time, I can't be changing myself as a person year in, year out just because of some success that we're having. I need to stay humble. I need to stay hungry, and I need to keep on the grind and keep working hard and keep trying to learn as much as I can. It's never a finished product. And so just because we won a championship and, the Tuesday before the championship, we were trap bar deadlifting 90% for a couple singles, doesn't mean that that's, okay, this is how it is. I have to keep researching and keep evolving. And so I feel like as anyone, who stops at evolution of themselves as a coach, is because of the status they're in, if they feel as if they've made it, so to speak. I think that's an easy pitfall and easy trap to fall into.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Stanford volleyball is 13, I think, and 0 in Pac-12 right now. I want to wish you guys and you as a coach as much success as I possibly can, although we stand across the court from each other.
Yes.
So I'd like to see Colorado volleyball deliver bad news, but at the end of the day, I want everybody to compete as hard as they can and to be healthy and to walk off that court injury-free. And if both of us could win, that would be great. However, that is that's not sport, and that's not the fun of it, right? So, hey, if a coach that is listening to the show, if they could want to reach out to you and maybe they're passing through and they want to buy coffee and sit down and pick your brain, what's the best and easiest way that a coach could reach out and ask you some questions?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. If you I'm public, so if you look up Tyler Friedrich, or my username is FriedrichT1, that's a great way to get a hold of me and send me a message on there. I'm also on Twitter. My Twitter handle is tfrieds, that's TFRIEDS75, and just send me a message on there. I'm pretty much in tune with this stuff, so I try to respond as quickly as possible. And you can always send me an email. If you go on our website, gostanford.com, my email address is on there, so it's easy. Send me an email, and I really try to respond to those pretty quickly because that's just how we communicate in today's world, is via email. So if anyone wants to reach out in any of those three platforms, like I'm pretty accessible. and would love to talk with anybody coming through. We have 2 facilities here on campus that are great to see, and our campus is beautiful as well. So if anyone's ever around, feel free to reach out.
Well, Coach, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Decoding Excellence Show, and I look forward to heading out there at some point in time and sharing a drink together, coffee, whatever, and touching base, man. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks. I want to thank Coach Tyler Friedrich from Stanford Sports Performance for coming on the Decoding Excellence Show and sharing just some of the advice that he's received through his own coaching journey. I took a lot away from the conversation when we started to discuss performance technology and GPS and how he is using that to calculate acute chronic ratios for the student athletes that he works with. This was a fun conversation, one that shares his wisdom, the successes in his coaching journey, some of the failures, and offers a lot of practical advice for young coaches in the industry. So I just wanted to thank Coach Friedrich for coming on the Decoding Excellence Show, investing his time with the listening audience of the Decoding Excellence Show. So Coach Friedrich, thank you so much for hopping on. But like always, I wanted to thank you, the listener, the audience who is listening to the Decoding Excellence Show right now. Without you and the feedback that you've provided over the last several months, this show wouldn't exist. So thank you so much for your continued support with the Decoding Excellence Show. And please, if you like this show, do 2 things for me. Number 1, share it on your favorite social media of choice, right? And this will allow the circulation of the show to new people who wouldn't otherwise have discovered or explored the Decoding Excellence Show. And simply by sharing it, you are helping the industry out. Secondly, please go onto iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. This is the game of podcasting, right? Shows that have a higher review find its way up through the podcast charts and are more discoverable. So if you log on to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review, the show can be discovered more, and therefore you're helping the industry by putting this in the spotlight for other strength and conditioning professionals who are getting into this industry. And like always, this is an exploration of the tools, the tactics, the habits, and the intangibles that go into really decoding excellence performance. Thank you again. Hey everybody, I wanted to remind you that today I'm sending out my weekly newsletter. And what this newsletter consists of is just a couple sentences, a few paragraphs that is describing some of my favorite things, some of the things I've been finding interesting online. It could be research, it could be things I'm exploring, books I'm reading, things I'm listening to. I think you're going to get a lot of value out of it. It won't spam your inbox. It comes out once a week, and it's a great way to stay connected into the world of what I'm thinking and what I'm exploring. So head over to adamringler.com, pop in your email, and you'll begin receiving the weekly newsletter immediately. And if you haven't already, please pop over to facebook.com, start to follow Adam Ringler, where you'll receive any of the updates and the latest podcast and Decoding Excellence Show materials online. So check it out at facebook.com/Adam Ringler.